Back to the beginning. The phone checked for the 5th time. The person looked at while they sleep. The name called out just to hear a voice come back. He heard her footsteps behind him in the dark. He knew she was there. And it wasn't enough. The easy question, the one this story usually gets reduced to, is whether the person who loves you needs proof that you're real. Whether the person on your side of the love requires a kind of confirmation that the fact of your presence can't quite provide. That's the easy question. It's actually a painful one. The harder question, the one Orpheus never asked himself, goes in the other direction. The person in the room with you, the one breathing, the one who is actually there close enough to touch, present enough to hear, real in every way. That real is supposed to mean anything. Are they real enough to you when you're not looking at them? When they're in the other room? When they're asleep beside you? When they're somewhere in the world outside your line of sight? Living in a way you can't see and can't confirm? Or are you still asking the people you love to prove they have not disappeared? The wedding torch wouldn't hold a flame. It sputtered, filled the room with smoke, wouldn't catch not properly. Not the way a torch is supposed to catch when it's lit for something that is supposed to last. The god of marriage himself was there that day. That's not a metaphor in the ancient Greek world. Hymen was a god with a specific function, and his function was to be present. At the moment, 2 people were joined, and he was there, standing in the room, but he gave no happy omen, no hallowed words, no sign that what was happening had been recognized by anything larger than the room. The torch just wouldn't prove it. Nobody in that room knew what to do with that. So they continued anyway. This detail looks small. We will come back to it. The man standing at that wedding, when he played his lyre, trees moved. Not a metaphor. Not the kind of image a poet reaches for when they want to describe talent and don't have better words. The ancient Greeks believed this literally. The earliest sources describe it without apology, without the framing of myth as fairy tale, just when this man played. The natural world physically oriented itself toward the sound. Rivers slowed. Boulders rolled toward him. Wild animals came and sat at his feet, the way domesticated ones do not because they were tamed, but because the music pulled at something in the physics of the world, and the world responded. He didn't learn this. He wasn't trained. He was born, and the world was already listening. His name was Orpheus. He was the son of Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, one of the 9 daughters of Zeus, the one whose function was to inspire the telling of stories so large they needed to fill an entire world to have room to breathe. His father, by some accounts, was Apollo, the god of music, of light, of the particular kind of clarity that can make something both beautiful and devastating at once, which is another way of saying music wasn't something he did. It was the material he was made of. He joined the Argonauts. He sailed with Jason in search of the Golden Fleece, not as a warrior, not as someone whose function was to fight. His function was something else. When they passed the sirens, the creatures whose singing had lured sailors to their deaths since before anyone could remember, who had turned the sea around their island into a graveyard of ships that came too close and couldn't turn away, Orpheus played louder. He played something more beautiful than what the sirens were offering. And the Argonauts, who had already begun to turn toward the sound that would kill them, turned back, not because they were warned, because they heard something better. That was his gift, not strength, not strategy, the ability to make the world turn toward him without knowing it was turning. He would use it again, in a darker place, with a higher cost, the woman he married, before she was the woman Orpheus lost. She was someone walking with her own friends, through her own afternoon, in a life that had not yet become his tragedy. Ovid doesn't give us much about her before she dies. That is the first thing to notice, and it matters more than it seems to. But there is one scene, just one, the wedding day. Sometime in the afternoon, Ovid doesn't say the hour, doesn't fix it in light or shadow. She is walking through the grass, not beside Orpheus, with friends the naiads, the water nymphs who had known her, who were part of whatever her life had been before this day. The grass is green. It is probably warm. It is, presumably, the kind of afternoon that should be remembered as perfect, the first day of a life she was just beginning. Ovid doesn't tell us what she was thinking. He doesn't tell us what she said to the people beside her. He doesn't tell us whether she was laughing, or whether she was the kind of person who went quiet in happiness, who held good things gently without needing to perform them. He gives us her walking, in the grass, on her wedding day, alive and unaware that she is living her last afternoon. And then a viper hidden in the grass bit her on the ankle, and she died. Ovid spends 3 lines on this. 3 lines for the entire known existence of the woman that the whole story turns on. Her name was Eurydice. 3 lines. There is something in that. We will find out what happened to Orpheus after. Ovid writes, "He filled the highs of heaven with the moans of his lament. Not he wept. Not he went to the grave. Not he sat with whatever she had left behind and let the loss move through him the way loss moves through people who are willing to be moved. He filled the highs of heaven, up, out, towards something large enough, important enough, present enough to receive what he was carrying. Grief directed outward. Grief as a thing to be witnessed. Grief that needed the word Ovid uses is clear about this, to be times recognized. And then he made a decision. Ovid writes, determined also the dark underworld should recognize the misery of death. That word again. Recognize. Not retrieve her. Not refuse to live without her. Not even be with her. He wanted the underworld to recognize. He wanted something, some audience vast enough, some power old enough, some witness that could not be argued with, to acknowledge what this was. Hold that word. Recognize. Not retrieve. Not recover. Not even the word that would make the most obvious emotional sense. The simple human word for not being able to live in the absence of someone. He wanted the underworld to recognize, which is the word you use when you need a witness, when having the experience isn't enough, when you need something outside of it, something larger, something official, something with the authority to confirm that what you're feeling is real, is significant, is something that deserves to be seen and acknowledged by a power that doesn't simply feel whatever you're feeling along with you. He needed the cosmos to look at his grief and say, yes, this is real. This counts. We are going to come back to that word. But first, the torch at the wedding wouldn't catch. And Orpheus stood at the edge of the world and decided to go down because something needed to recognize what he was carrying. 2 facts. The space between them that is where this story actually lives. Tainaris, a cape at the southern tip of Greece, a place that exists on actual maps, that has actual coordinates, that you can visit today if you want to stand at the place where the ancient Greeks believed the world of the living ended. A cave there, going down into darkness. And if you went far enough in, this is what they believed. Literally. Not as poetry. Not as metaphor you crossed out of the world of the living and into the world of the dead. He walked in, no armor, no weapon, no divine protection arranged in advance. Just the liar. I want to describe what happened when he entered the underworld, the way Ovid describes it, which is to say, as a sequence of things that stopped. This is worth slowing down for, because what Ovid is describing is not just the power of music. He is describing something about the specific quality of what Orpheus made, the way it moved through a space that was built around permanence, around the fixed nature of punishment and the unchangeable weight of the dead, and made things that had not moved in ages be still in a different way. The stillness of a thing that has been stopped by something it didn't expect. Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guards the entrance to Hades, who has never, in the entire span of the underworld's existence, permitted a living person to pass, stopped. Charon, the ferryman of the dead, the one who carries souls across the river Styx, the one who has never, in all that time, carried a living soul. Let him through. The Eumenides, the Furies, the relentless ones, the ones whose function in the universe is to pursue and punish without pause, without mercy, without any of the softness that makes human judgment unreliable. Wept. For the first time, Sisyphus condemned since before most gods were born to roll a boulder up a hill, to watch it roll back down, to begin again, forever, without variation, without end. Sat down on his rock, just sat. Tantalus, condemned to stand in water that recedes when he bends to drink, beneath fruit that rises out of reach when he lifts his hand, condemned to the particular torture of being surrounded by what you need and never being able to touch it. Stopped reaching. The wheel of Ixion spinning since before memory, since before the current arrangement of things. Stopped. The entire underworld stopped. And then he stood before Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of everything that dies. He opened his mouth. If you expect a love song, if you have been told this story as a story about the power of love, about what love is willing to do, about the lengths a person will go when they cannot live without another person, Ovid gives you something stranger, something that I think, once you see it, you cannot unsee. He doesn't describe Eurydice. Not once. Not her face. Not her name. Not at first. Not what she sounded like. Not what it was like to be in a room with her. Not the particular texture of her absence that he cannot breathe inside. None of it. He builds a case. Sentence by sentence. Premise following premise. The way an argument is built, not with emotion as its foundation, but with structure, with the careful assembly of a position that makes the other side logically untenable. He says, I haven't come here out of curiosity. I haven't come to see what this place looks like. I've come because love conquered me, and love is a god you know as well as anyone. A force that operates in your world exactly as it operates in mine. If you have any jurisdiction over it, you understand what brought me here. If you don't, then you understand that I had no choice. He says, everything comes to you eventually. She will be here, in full. At the proper time, she is only asking to be borrowed. Alan, the years she was owed that she didn't get to live. He says, if you refuse, I am not going back without her. You will have to keep both of us. And then, the line that has been sitting in the middle of this story for 2,000 years. What had she to complain of but that she was loved? Every line of that speech was calculated. Every word chosen to close off the possibility of refusal, without the refusal contradicting itself. He didn't ask Hades to be kind. He asked Hades to be consistent, to be the version of himself that the underworld required him to be. And notice what is absent from that speech. He never describes Eurydice. He never says what she was like, what it felt like to be near her, what particular quality of her presence had been worth the descent. He never gives Hades any reason to care about her specifically. He gives Hades reasons to care about the principle, about consistency, about the logic of love and death and the relationship between them. He makes the case for Eurydice without Eurydice in it. This is not a love song. This is a negotiation built by a man who had spent his entire life knowing exactly how to make something respond the way he needed it to. The trees, the rivers, the stones, the sirens. He knew how to find the frequency that made the world lean toward him. He found it again here. For the first and only time, the hard cheeks of the fierce Eumenides were wet with tears. The first and only time, in all of Greek mythology, in all the thousands of years of stories about what happens when you die, and where you go, and what waits for you there, the first time the relentless ones were moved to weeping, Hades agreed. One condition: Eurydice would follow behind him. He would walk in front, and he would not look back at her until they had both crossed out of the underworld. That was all, just that. They began to walk. He went first. She came behind him. Slowly, because her ankle still carried the wound from the snake on the wedding day. Still there, still marking every step with the fact of where this began. They walked in silence. Upward through the dark, through the particular blackness of a passage that has only one direction and only one thing waiting at the end of it. No talking, no reaching back to find a hand, no checking, just the sound of her footsteps. Behind him, one step, Pause, another step, the wound slowing her down, the rhythm of it uneven, careful. Trying the rhythm of someone returning to life, one step at a time. Just that sound. Ahead of him, the darkness beginning to change. Something that wasn't quite light yet, but was the first sign of it. The suggestion that the passage was ending. The world was close. They were almost there. Light. Not full light, just the first brightness after a long darkness. The particular quality of air that tells you a room is ending, that something is opening up ahead, that the world you left is waiting on the other side of whatever is still left to cross. He could see it. They were almost there. He could not see her, but he could hear her. One step. Pause. One more step. The ankle, the wound from the wedding day, from the viper in the grass, from the moment she was walking in sunshine with people she loved, and the afternoon turned in the way that afternoons sometimes do. Without warning, without anything to distinguish that second from the one before it. Still there, still in her, still marking every step with the cost of what this had been. She was walking, slowly, but walking, toward the light, toward the life she'd been promised and hadn't had time to live, toward him, always behind him. Always that particular step behind that, the condition required. And the only proof she was there, the only thing he had to confirm that the argument had worked, that Hades had kept his word, that the enormous effort of the descent and the negotiation and the walk back through the dark had actually produced what it was supposed to produce, was the sound of those footsteps. One step, pause, one more. That was all he had. Not her face, Not her hand in his hand. Not her voice. Not anything that required her to exist in his field of vision. To be present in the way that presence feels solid, confirmed by eyes, verified by sight. Real, in the way that real has to mean something you can see. Just the sound of someone trying to come back to life in the dark behind him. And it wasn't enough. Ovid writes a phrase here, a Latin phrase that I keep returning to because I cannot fully translate it without losing what makes it precise. Avidusque videndi. The root is times avidus, times the same word used in Latin for greed. For the particular quality of wanting that isn't satisfied by having, the wanting that continues past the point where having should end it. The wanting that increases rather than diminishes when it gets what it was reaching for. Avidusque videndi. Hungry to see. Not afraid she wasn't there. Not worried she couldn't keep up. Not suspicious that Hades had found a trick in the condition to cheat him out of what he'd won. Hungry to see. She was behind him. He knew this. He could hear the proof of it one slow step. The pause between them, where the wound made itself known. Another step. The knowing wasn't enough. The hearing wasn't enough. He needed to see. The hunger for it, for the confirmation of her face. For her to exist in the space his eyes could reach was bigger than the knowing, was bigger than the hearing, was bigger, in the end, than the condition. He turned around. Instantly, she slipped away. He reached out both arms, grasping at whatever was still there, trying to hold something that was already going. Just air. Cold, empty. The particular texture of a space from which something has just been taken. And she. Ovid is precise here. He is precise in the way that takes your breath away if you slow down long enough to notice it. Dying for the second time, she could not say a word of censure of her husband's fault. She did not blame him. What was there to blame except that she was loved? The last word. She said the only word, barely audible, barely real, was farewell. She did not blame him. That is what makes it worse. She was loved by a man who went to the underworld for her, who made the Furies cry, who negotiated with death itself and won. And she died of that love, twice. The first time a snake in the grass. That death had nothing to do with him, just the world being the world. The random cruelty of an afternoon that turned. The second time, the hunger to see. The second time, the love itself was the mechanism, not cruelty, not indifference. The loving, the specific. Enormous. Underworld stopping love. That was the thing that sent her back. And she could not complain. Because it was love. Or something so close to love that the distinction barely matters when you are the one returning to the dark. 7 days. He went back to the entrance, asked Charon to let him cross again. Charon refused. 7 days he sat on the bank of the river of the dead, without eating, without drinking, just sitting with the fact of what had happened, with the specific knowledge that he had been given, the rarest thing in the history of the world. Something that had never happened before and would not happen again. Something that the Furies had cried over and Sisyphus had paused his boulder for. And he had lost it. Not to a trick, not to Hades, finding a loophole, not to anything outside of himself, to the hunger to see that was bigger than everything else. 7 days. And the thing about 7 days by the river of the dead, with no food and no water, with nothing but the sound of the water and the memory of a word barely heard before it disappeared, is that you have a great deal of time to understand exactly what you did. Not what happened to you, what you did. And then he stood up and walked back. What he did when he got home, that is where the answer lives. Not in the tunnel, not in the moment of the look, in what came after, in what he built when he came home without her. You've been asking why he looked back. The answer isn't in the tunnel. It's in what happened when he came home, in the world he built after, in the choices he made when he had to figure out how to live inside the life that was left. He went back to Thrace, up into the hills, away from the city, away from the specific texture of a life that had included her and now had to be navigated without her, away from anywhere that had people in it. And he began to play. And the trees came. Ovid lists them, not as metaphor, not as ornament, as inventory. The oak and the linden and the beech, the ash and the laurel, the willow, the poplar, the soft-needled fir, all of them moving, all of them coming toward the sound, gathering around him in the hills to be near whatever it was he was offering. Notice what is not on that list. No people came. The trees came. The rivers slowed nearby. Animals, the wild ones, the ones that don't come to human hands, sat at the edge of the sound and stayed. No people, or rather, no people were invited. No people were sought. No people were the audience he was building this for. Only things that arrive when he plays and have no capacity to leave when he stops. Things without will of their own. Things that cannot look at him and want something back. Things that cannot ask him a question he doesn't know how to answer. Things that cannot be in the room and be so fully there that their there-ness requires him to reckon with it. Only things whose presence he could feel without needing to see them to believe they were real. The women of Thrace came. Some of them had been drawn to him before. Some of them came now because grief has a quality that some people are pulled toward the rawness of it. The visibility of a person who is not hiding what they've lost. They came. He refused all of them. Ovid gives two possible reasons. Either marriage had meant misfortune, or he had made some kind of promise. Both, neither, resolved into one. Just the fact he turned away from every person who came with their own weight of being real, their own capacity to want things, their own ability to be somewhere outside his line of sight, and therefore, somehow, somewhere he couldn't reach. He went back to the hills. He went back to the trees. And the songs he sang in the forest. For the trees, they were not about Eurydice. I want you to stay with that for a moment. He is alone in Thrace. He has just lost her for the second time. The specific silence of a house that used to have someone in it is what his days are made of now. And the songs he sings are not about her. He sings about loves where the beloved cannot answer back. Ganymede, the beautiful boy taken up to Olympus by Zeus, held there, elevated beyond ordinary time, transformed from a person into something permanent and kept. Hyacinthus, loved by Apollo, killed by accident, turned into the flower that grew from the blood of the wound, preserved in beauty, held in art, present forever in the way that the dead are sometimes more completely present than the living. Loves interrupted by death or elevated beyond reach. Loves where the beloved no longer stands across from you. Free to turn away. Free to have a morning that has nothing to do with you. Free to exist in a room you're not in and be real there too. Real in a way you can't confirm because you're not watching. Loves where the beloved exists only as he holds them in memory. In art. In the part of the mind that keeps what it keeps, exactly as it wants to keep it. It begins to look as if he is arranging a world where the things he loves stayed where he put them, where nothing existed outside the radius of what he could see, where no one could be somewhere he couldn't reach, alive in a way he couldn't account for, real in a way that required something other than his looking to confirm. The Maenads, the women of Thrace, the followers of Dionysus, had tried to reach him before. He had not looked back. There is something in that sits very close to the moment in the tunnel. Ovid does not comment on it. He just writes it. He had not looked back. One afternoon, their voices rose above the music. The particular quality of the sound, they made the noise of the Dionysian rite. The tambourines and the pipes and the specific human sound of people not trying to be beautiful was loud enough that the lyre couldn't hold it. For the first time in the life of Orpheus, the music lost. They came for him. And Ovid, who has described the most tender and terrible things in the history of Roman poetry, describes what happened next with the kind of brevity that is its own form of devastation. They tore the singer apart, and for the first time the world did not stop to listen. His head fell into the river Hebrus. And Virgil, writing in Latin, a generation later, with access to some version of this story we no longer have. Virgil writes, "Even then, even floating down the river, severed from everything that had carried the music for a lifetime, the voice was still singing, still calling a name. Eurydice. The banks of the river echoed it back. Eurydice. The only name, still the only name, the last sound of a life that had filled the sky with grief and moved the underworld to tears and built a world out of things that couldn't leave. Still, at the end of it, her name. Did he love her? Or did he love something about her that required her to be held in a particular way visible? Confirmed. Existing within the boundaries of what he could see to feel real. Did he love her? Or did he love the version of her that he carried, the one that couldn't disappear into a field on a wedding day? That couldn't be lost to a second in the grass when he wasn't watching? That couldn't be somewhere behind him in the dark, without the wanting to see her becoming bigger than everything? There is one more part of this story. It is right there in Ovid, right after the death. Almost no one tells it. And it changes everything that came before. There is a part of this story that almost no one tells. Not because it requires research, not because it lives in some obscure corner of the scholarly record. It is right there, in Book 11 of Ovid's Metamorphoses, right after the head stops singing, right after the banks of the river stop echoing the name back. Ovid just keeps going. The shade of Orpheus descended to the underworld. The second time, but not the way he came the first time. No lyre, no music. No argument assembled word by careful word to make refusal logically impossible. No case built from the nature of love and the consistency of death and the fact that everything ends up here anyway. No tool, no leverage, nothing to offer, nothing to prove. Just him. What was left of him, going down the way that everyone goes, with nothing in their hands. Without anything prepared, without a strategy. He found her. Ovid writes this simply, without the machinery of the first descent, without the long approach, the crossing of the river, the stopped wheel, the paused boulder, the wept-over furies. He went down. He found her. In the fields of the blessed, the part of the afterworld that isn't punishment, that isn't waiting, that is simply after. He found her there, and he held her. Then lovingly, they wandered side by side. Side by side. Not him in front. Not her behind. Not the arrangement of that. Walk his back to her. Her footsteps. The only thing he was allowed to have of her. The sound of her trying to come back to life. That wasn't enough. That was never going to be enough. That he couldn't hold the condition for in the last 100 feet. Side by side. Walking. Together. And then Ovid adds something. A detail so small it is easy to move past. So quiet it can disappear into the rest of the sentence if you're not reading slowly enough. Or he would follow when she chose to lead. When she chose. When times she, times chose. Read that again. In Ovid's version of the reunion, for the first time in this entire story, Eurydice chooses a direction. Not walking behind him toward his destination. Not following the path he set in front of her. Not present as footsteps he could hear but couldn't see. As a presence that existed in his world only at the edge of his perception. She chooses where to walk. And he follows. At another time he walked in front. Looking back. Safely. At Eurydice. Looking back. Safely. The first time he looked back, she was lost. Here, he looks back, and she is there. The same gesture, a completely different world. The difference is not that he has changed. The difference is that here, in the only place where she cannot leave, she cannot disappear. She cannot be behind him in the dark, with her presence reduced to a sound he has to trust without seeing. She cannot be in a field in the afternoon, in a moment he isn't watching. Here, she is simply there. And for the first time, he can look. Not because he became better, but because the thing that made the tunnel unbearable, the possibility of her being lost, the hunger that was bigger than the knowing, bigger than the hearing, bigger than the footsteps, that is gone. She is not going anywhere. And so he can love her fully, in the only place where full is something he's capable of. And perhaps this is the thing that was always true about him. And perhaps it is the thing that is sometimes true about us. Not that we don't love enough, but that we can only love fully when the person we love can no longer leave. When the proof is permanent, when the presence is guaranteed, when the looking back, the turn toward verification, toward confirmation, toward the hunger to see that is bigger than any amount of knowing, is safe. They wander, side by side, in the fields of the blessed. Sometimes she leads, sometimes he does, and sometimes he walks in front, looking back, safely. At Eurydice. I want to stay with this image for a moment, because I think it is the image the whole story has been building toward, and it is so quiet, so without drama, that it is easy to let it go past. Two people, walking in the underworld, side by side. After everything, the wedding that started wrong, the snake in the grass, the descent, the argument that moved death to tears, the condition, the walk, the light, the footsteps, the turning, the loss, the second death, the 7 days, the hills, the trees, the songs about loves that couldn't leave, the violence, the river, the name still being called. After all of that, two people, walking, together, and sometimes she leads, and he follows, and sometimes he looks back, and she is there, and it is safe, There is something a lot of people do that nobody ever really explains. The person they love is in the room, right there, close enough to touch. And they check their phone anyway, for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Not because they're expecting anything, just to have somewhere else to look. Or they turn to look at the person sleeping beside them, not because they heard anything, not because something woke them, just to make sure, just to see the shape of them in the dark and confirm what they already know. Or they call out a name from the other room, not because they need anything, just to hear a voice come back. Sometimes knowing someone is there is not the same as feeling they are real. The ancient Greeks had a story about this. Not a love story, not a story about loss. Exactly, though it is full of loss. A story about that distance and what it costs. He went to the underworld for her. He stood before the Furies creatures that had never once wept in the entire history of the world, and his music made them cry. Hades agreed to let her go. He walked back through the dark, with her following behind him. They were almost out. The light was right there, 100 feet, maybe less. And he looked back. The question everyone asks is why. But there is a different question, one that gets asked less often. One that sits underneath the obvious one, like something waiting to be found. Why was her presence behind him not enough? Why were her footsteps the sound of her? Right there, right behind him, alive, following him back to the world. Why wasn't that enough for him to believe she was real?